funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation, and the Nieper Natural History Programming Fund for KNME-TV. And viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, the Libertarian candidate in the special election to replace Deb Haaland talks about what he brings to the race.
I look at, okay, what is the best way to get something done while still staying true to my principle.
Plus, our land returns as officials brace for the return of a pesky problem at New Mexico lakes this summer. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. It's the second Friday of the month, so our land is back. Laura Paskus has a look at toxic algae blooms in some popular New Mexico reservoirs. The Line Opinion Panel debates the perils of a potential eviction crisis as housing prices are soaring despite relatively high unemployment numbers and a fragile pandemic economy. The group also talks about the return of the job search requirement for people receiving unemployment. But we begin by looking eastward. Here's the line. The old saying is all politics are local, but apparently not when it comes to this weekend's New Mexico Republican Party convention. Republican Chairman Steve Pearce announced about a month ago the event dubbed Operation Freedom would be moved to Amarillo, Texas because of the continuing restrictions related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Here to talk about the decision and what message it sends is our weekly Line Opinion Panel. We welcome back to the Zoom room Line regular and attorney Laura Sanchez. Also Dan Foley, former House Minority Whip. And we welcome back our special guest, political psychologist, activist, and author Martha Burke. Welcome to you all. Now, Texas has, of course, lifted the mask mandate, and public gatherings here in New Mexico are still limited to 150 people. And Chairman Pearce says more than 300 people are registered to attend this weekend's GOP convention. He says it was a pragmatic decision because of that. But Daniel, can you really call it anything else but a symbolic defiance move here?
I think there's more to it than that from Pearce's perspective. You know, this is a guy who barely got reelected chairman against some rather odd competition. I mean, he beat a radio talk show host who was a Democrat, then a libertarian. It took, going off the Zoom meeting and going back to a special recount. I think this is a way to make sure that you have a convention that has the people you want there. If you're not you're either going to have to be a diehard, want to go at this Republican. If you had it in Albuquerque, the guy who you beat by 2 votes in the third recount behind closed doors might show up at the state convention and have some issues.
Right.
I doubt those people are going to get in a car and drive 5 hours to go to Amarillo. And it's just whether it's defiant or not. I think it sends absolutely the wrong message, on multiple levels. Look, if you're really that tough and believe things are really that wrong, then go ahead and have it somewhere in a county in New Mexico that needs the help, right? I mean, we saw what happened at Old Town over the weekend, right? I'm not advocating it, but the restaurant that they called on and said, oh, they're not wearing masks, the police showed up and the people met them, and the police were like, forget it, we're out, we're not. This is not what we do. And it ended peacefully. But, it was the power of the people showing up and saying, we're not doing this anymore. So if you really cared about New Mexicans and were really focused on helping New Mexico, I assure you there's places in Catron County, there's places in San Miguel County, there's places in multiple counties around New Mexico who their police, their individuals would be 100% supportive. And the one hotel or the one little convention center, or the one big church in town, it doesn't matter. The one restaurant that day, you could make their year by catering sandwiches and drinks and food to an organization. But instead, when it's about you and not about doing what's right for your constituents, you're going to head to, Amarillo and try to make a statement. I just think it's another reason why the Republicans, as a Republican in New Mexico, we're constantly in a permanent majority. I mean, we have seen the enemy, and the enemy is us.
Martha, pick up on that. That's an hard to argue take on the street from Dan. And we're talking about practical matters and helping people if this is your thing. Do you think it could have been pulled off in New Mexico if these folks really wanted to do this?
Well, absolutely. I don't know why Dan would be against them going to the garden spot of Texas, and he doesn't think flow. But actually, I think the bottom line here, Gene, is grandstanding. I think he wanted to take a shot at the governor, and he did that because he hasn't ruled out running again. I think he is going to, if he does run again, it'll be seen as a retread. So it probably won't do him any good. I agree with Dan, lightning strikes, because I think it is a slap in the face of New Mexico Republicans, because they're not going to want to drive to Amarillo, and there's no really good way to get there.
That's true.
Except drive. And but the other thing is the excuse Pierce gave. He either lied outright or he doesn't know the New Mexico restrictions, because he said the luminaries wouldn't come from out of state, if you count Jordan as a luminary in anything but the Kook caucus, because they might get stuck here. Well, we have not had quarantine since last December. So he didn't know better, or he just thought this sounded good. And I think he's shooting himself in the foot, and he is really insulting a lot of his own constituents in the state.
Laura, interesting point there from Martha. We're talking about Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota, and Jim Jordan. She mentioned that we're scheduled to be. You don't need a visa. I mean, really, if Kristi Noem came, was it going to be state troopers at the border to run her out? I mean, it just. What do you make of that excuse?
Oh, I agree. It was just, he really is reaching when he when he made that comment. But I think, more importantly, I hate that this entire pandemic and the vaccination and everything related to it has turned into a partisan issue. And these are not partisan issues. These are health issues. These are about personal responsibility. I understand some people don't want to wear a mask, but people who don't, also there are a lot of people I know very well who don't want to get vaccinated for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of fear. But the bottom line is, when you have an event like this and you invite people to be there in person, you have to recognize that there's the potential to create a super spreader event that then can be brought back to these local communities.
That's right.
And in some of these local communities, we're talking about areas where folks are, for whatever reason, not getting vaccinated. So they're not even protected against the spread of this disease. And so, I think about the Trump rally that was held in Oklahoma in the middle of the pandemic when, oh gosh, I'm going to forget his name.
Herman Cain, when he passed
Herman
away.
Cain, thank you. Herman Cain.
We all knew when you mentioned it.
Yeah, I could picture him, but I could not remember his name at that minute, at that moment. But, Herman Cain, when we all think, or I believe, that he contracted it during that super spreader event, as did others, and then he died. It's terrible to even consider having an event like that when we've all gotten, over the last year, used to doing things on Zoom. We've all gotten familiar with this. People of all generations are able to maneuver a Zoom conference and whatnot, and get business done without needing to travel 5 hours to another state and put yourselves and your loved ones in jeopardy.
Hey, Daniel, business has to be done, whether it's here or in Texas. And, the chairman is throwing out some positive words there about working across the aisle, encouraging people to run for school board, and down ticket particularly was very, very interesting. Does that ring hollow in any way, given these conversations that are happening out of state? Does that make any kind of a difference?
No, I mean, I think, look, Pierce is everything that's wrong with the Republican Party, right? I mean, the last thing the Republican Party needs is more rich white guys with, that sound like they're from Dallas, Texas. It just is not something that is inclusive of the citizens of the state. And every chance that he's gotten to put himself out there, whether it's running for governor, running for chairman of the party, it's been an embarrassment, whether it's, his keeping the fight, keeping the people hired that went after Susana Martinez, to his constant attacks on Republicans that don't side with him or agree with him. Look, the last election cycle was a complete disaster from, the state party. I mean, it was non-existent. I mean, everything from the top of the ticket down, we took a bath. And, if I was chairman of the party and had the same outcome, and by the way, I went on the record guaranteeing a Trump victory in New Mexico.
That's right.
He guaranteed a Trump victory in New Mexico. And the president took a shellacking in New Mexico. And so, at the end of the day, this is this has turned into the this has turned into the Steve show, and that's what it's always been about. It's been about him and his organization. It has not been about results, because there haven't been any since he's been chairman. We've been moving in the wrong direction on just about every major metrics that there is as a party in New Mexico. And so, as long as Pierce and his guys are running the show, I think Brian Egoff and the Democrat Party should be sending checks and encouraging them to keep Steve Pierce as the chairman of the party.
That's all the time we have for that topic. When we come back to the Line Opinion Panel, we'll discuss changes to the state's unemployment policies.
If you see that type of formation or film on the water, avoid it. Avoid contact with it. Don't let your pets swim in it. Keep your kids out of it. And come tell park rangers so we can kind of get a understanding of if this is a new area and if what we need to key into.
The special election for New Mexico's 1st congressional district is underway. Expanded early voting begins May 15th and Election Day is June 1st. Last week we spoke to Melanie Stansbury and Mark Moores. This week we speak to the other major party candidate, and that's Libertarian Chris Manning. He's a military veteran who's found himself drawn to public policy since leaving the service. NMIF senior producer Matt Grubbs spoke with him via Zoom this week.
Chris Manning, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to join us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate the offer.
Absolutely. Let's start with libertarians. What would it mean to have a libertarian in Congress?
I think it'd be historic, since no libertarians ever won running as a libertarian. But two, what it also means is an effort and an ability to create, real bipartisanship, and in this case, tripartisanship, because libertarians have so much crossover ideologically with the two main parties, and it's very easy then for me to work with both sides of the aisle and to do that realistically.
In Washington, as you know, it's a pretty contentious environment right now. How would you sort of work to ingratiate yourself with leaders of both parties, and wouldn't aligning with one on one issue and another on another issue put you at somewhat of a disadvantage?
No, I don't think so. Obviously during this campaign, there's always an opportunity for candidates to take shots at each other. I don't know if you've seen the two debates that I was invited to. They always have a candidate questionnaire, and that's always intended to kind of get the candidates to go after each other. And I think you've seen I choose not to take that opportunity, not to take that bait. And instead, I maintain a positive focus. You won't hear me dragging my opponents. And so taking that mentality to Washington, D.C. allows me to work with people, because let's be honest about what Washington is. If you're trying to get something done, it's about your interpersonal communication and your relationships with people. And we used to have that ideal, that as a representative, your job was to go and create that bipartisanship. And I think veterans particularly, there's very strong evidence that shows that veterans in particular are the most bipartisan and tripartisan, representatives in Congress. And again, I have that going for me. And so I think by simply being true to myself and maintaining that characteristic in DC is going to go a lot further than having disagreements on certain policy issues with one side and the other.
Would you attempt to caucus with either party, or would you kind of leave it to, as you said, that interpersonal communication?
I leave it to the interpersonal. I think if I were to go and then I just immediately caucus with one party or the other, I think that kind of ruins my image as being independent. And that's really what I want to project. There are certain caucuses that aren't aligned along party lines that I think would be beneficial. And one of those is the Problem Solvers Caucus, where obviously, if you paid attention to my campaign, I'm very much a solutions-oriented person. And so I would look at, okay, what is the best way to get something done while still staying true to my principles? So that's a caucus that I would be interested in. Sure.
We make a big deal in New Mexico, especially in political campaigns, about being, sort of from here. And you are. You have a different view of that, though, because as is allowed, you live in Farmington. That's outside of the district. I guess the question is, why don't you live in the district? And if you did represent it, would you plan on moving to it?
Yeah. I lived in Albuquerque as a child. I grew up and did K through 3, third grade in Albuquerque. I went to Apache Elementary School, and like many parents and families in New Mexico, the crime and poor education in Albuquerque was a driver of why we left. My mom was terrified of me going to junior high and high school in Albuquerque. And so when an opportunity presented to go home and live in a little bit more, I would say, obviously a safer neighborhood for raising me, my parents took that opportunity. And unfortunately, a lot of people are making that decision. And I think the census data shows so many people are actually leaving the state. They're not just moving to different parts of the state like my family did. They are moving out of the state. And until we change our education and our criminal justice in Albuquerque, that's going to be the way things are in the future. And I think obviously having a degree in secondary education with my emphasis in history, I have a view of how to change education that I don't think any of my competitors have. And even though this is a national race, you have the federal office, you don't see a whole lot of education policy. Education is something I focus a lot on. You'll see I understand that relationship between education and crime. I bring it up often that until you change the education, you can't really change the crime.
Okay. Do you have a feeling of whether or not you'd try to maintain some sort of a residence here if you did win?
I don't know. And that would be hard because I've literally just bought my house. I'm a first-time homeowner. I signed the closing documents the day after I filed to run. And so the idea of doing that all over again is kind of daunting. But I also think one of the great things about technology, and unfortunately one of the few bright glimmers of COVID, is that it showed that you can be anywhere and still be a good representative. For right now, a classic example, right now, you and I are having a video conference and it's good connection. It's not like it was 10 years ago. And the truth of the matter is your representative is in DC the majority of the time. So is my address where when I'm home a couple weeks out of the year going to make a difference? When I have a philosophy of being very open, and you'll start seeing in these last 2 weeks where I'm going to be hosting Facebook Live events, YouTube events. I'm going to be doing a lot of online stuff, which anyone in the district then can attend. Anyone in the district can come. And I think that actually will make me a lot more available to the voters. And I'm going to take that same mentality to DC. It's not just a campaign thing. Obviously with the technology that we have, there's no reason not to continue to host these town halls where you can have 1,000 people attend rather than say 50 in person. So I'm going to take the benefits that we have right now and apply them if I were elected to represent the district.
Great. Well, let's get into some policy stuff. And you mentioned education, and you're right. There's not a whole lot that you do on the national level to impact what's happening in classrooms necessarily. I'm curious, going into higher education, what do you see as New Mexico doing right and perhaps wrong in how it handles higher education, trade schools, technical schools, that sort of thing?
Yeah. I think over the last several years, and I'd say maybe more than a decade, there's been too much of an emphasis on a college degree as your only ability to really provide for yourself in the future. When you really look at the data, only about 25% of New Mexicans have a college degree. So what are you telling these 75% of people who don't have that degree? What are we doing to help them? And I'm a big proponent of teaching kids in high school, taking in essence the Nordic model of education. And you have this kind of bifurcation of those who are looking to go to college and those who are looking to do trade skills. And I am a very big advocate of bringing back those trade skills that we used to have in the 60s and 70s. You want to be a mechanic? Let's teach you to be a mechanic. You want to be a cosmetologist? Let's get you your barber's license while you're still in high school. So the day you graduate, you now have a marketable skill, which pays well above minimum wage. And I think that does a lot to reduce, the poverty here in New Mexico, because what happens if you focus on that and we get you some sort of certificate, some sort of training, it helps the economy, but it helps you, the individual, a lot more. And so my focus is going to be more on the majority of people who don't go to college. I think there's already enough messaging for those who do, but I want to see a transition. Another area that I've talked about is the FAME program. And Kentucky implemented this several years ago in their community colleges. And it's a mix between your in essence, getting a 5-semester degree, associate's degree, while at the same time working in a manufacturing company. So the company is kind of helping pay the cost, and you get on the job training and you get paid. So you're getting paid to go to school. And then at the end of this program, the average FAME graduate 1 year out is making $59,000 a year. 5 years out, they're making $98,000 a year. I'm looking for ways to help people make 6-figure incomes that don't require 4-year degrees.
You've talked a lot about health insurance as being maybe the biggest issue for you. Only about 4% of New Mexico right now is on an individual plan, which you're a proponent of. Yes. Talk to me about how you would encourage the U.S. to move away from an employer-sponsored model onto an individual plan or an individual model.
So, and I think you take the Affordable Care Act as an example. And what was it based on? It was based on the Swiss healthcare system. And if you look at the Swiss, they have 100% individual health insurance plan. And so you make that philosophical leap. Okay, so we implemented a lot of the Swiss issues with the Affordable Care Act, but we didn't make that final transition, which would actually make it workable and move to an individual plan. Next thing I always talk about is when you lose your job, as so many people did during the pandemic, what do you also lose? You lose your health insurance, right? What if you want to change jobs or you want to take 6 months off? You don't do it. So many people don't do it because they're afraid of losing the health insurance. The second thing I talk about is we have to make it our plan. And really this is where Congress has to step up. We have to make the laws that make this possible. And for me, you have to marry one of the advantages we have over the Swiss, and that's our health savings account. The implementation of an individual health care plan, direct primary care, and health savings accounts makes an individual system completely workable. You have to have all three of those. And really, it's just a law in Congress which prevents you from having a health savings account with any policy. It's really, that's all it is. It's simply Congress wrote a law that says you can only have a health savings account if you have a high deductible health plan. Why? What is the point in limiting that? What is the point in limiting your ability to pay for future financial, medical emergencies? I don't see the logic in it. So I think if you can pitch that and you show how the individualization and this health savings accounts allows you as the family to make decisions of what coverages do you need, the ability to change your coverages at any time, just like you do with your car insurance. I want to make insurance a lot more personable. And I think it's out there. It's something that we can do. And if you can pitch that and you show people the advantages, particularly direct primary care, where you actually avoid insurance companies and get so much better care, when people see the studies on it and the realities of people who've made that switch, I think it'll work. But it'll be a slow process, and it'll be something that I have to fight, obviously, the insurance companies because they don't want it. You have to fight the lobbyists because they don't want it. And you have to fight unions and corporations who like what they've got going right now. It's a tough fight, but that's why I address the people.
Chris, can you explain direct primary care in just about 30 seconds? I want to get to other stuff too, but I want to make sure we're clear on that.
Sure. So direct primary care is basically you avoid using your health insurance to have access to your primary care physician. You pay a low monthly fee between $30 and $75 for an individual to $150 a month for a family, and you get unlimited access to your primary care physician. It allows for text care. It allows for home care. And so many direct primary care physicians make house calls, right? And you get on average 40 minutes session when you actually do have to go in. 90% of them offer same day or next day appointments. So it's something I'm going to talk about in my first Facebook Live event. So follow my campaign and we'll have that next week where I dive deeply into that.
All right. Let's move to foreign affairs, sort of. First of all, you served in Afghanistan, if I'm correct, and I'm curious your thoughts on the Biden administration's decision to announce that they'll be withdrawing completely from Afghanistan this fall.
I think it's a good policy, and I support it, and it's something I think is almost a decade late. Obviously, libertarians are very much against foreign wars. I'm no stranger. I've been there, and really the mission has been over since, at least in my eyes, since Osama bin Laden was killed. There was really nothing left after that for us to do. But instead, we've been trying to do a nation building in one of the poorest countries in the world, which honestly, the Afghan people haven't decided that they want to be a nation. And until the Afghan people decide that that's what they want, there's nothing that the United States can do can force that. But also our leaving us, and a lot of the criticism is, oh, it'll embolden the Taliban. Well, so much of the Taliban's enlistment is simply because they have so many foreign, as they see it, foreign fighters in their nation. And so when that's removed, that drives up a lot of their recruitment, because now what's the Taliban going to tell the people? Oh, we have to fight other Afghan people now? And that's not nearly as easy a sell for them. So I think a lot of the worry about leaving Afghanistan is overblown.
What do you think of President Trump? He had an America First stated policy and said that he wanted to get us out of endless wars. He didn't get us out of Afghanistan. Is there anything you see to take from his policy?
Well, about the only thing I'd say that he did really well was he didn't start any new wars. And he's the first president almost in my lifetime who didn't do that. And I think that he had, obviously he recognized that these foreign wars weren't in America's interest. Being in Iraq is not in our interest anymore. Being in Syria, keeping that civil war going on is not in our interest. Being in Somalia is not in our interest. I think after nearly 20 years and the dozens of countries that we have been fighting in and service members have been in, I think it's time to realize that we are doing more harm to our national security by keeping such a large footprint, so thin. And what we need to do is we need to bring all the troops home from these foreign engagements. We need to allow the military time to recover, to rebuild itself, because just even if you don't have combat losses of men and material, a constant war footing wears out material. And so planes, which were supposed to last for another 30 years, are only going to make it 10 because we put so many flight hours on them. And those are big structural changes to the military that we need.
I can think of a couple of businesses that wouldn't be wild about that plan, though.
No, and military industrial complex, which we were warned about, isn't either. But you also have to understand the military has actually been asking for years to do a base realignment and closure. And a couple of years ago in the defense authorization, Congress passed an amendment in there and said, we're going to approve the money, but we are forbidding the military from doing a study on a base realignment and closure. And the military is saying that they have about 20% excess capacity. And so, again, this is one of those areas where we allow corporations and the idea that the military is an employment factory, which we have to get around, we have to stop, right? The point of the military is not to keep people employed. The point of a military is to keep the nation safe. And that's why you get such a fight, especially in Congress, about base realignment and closures, because it could affect their district. And maybe it's their base that is this, the military says, well, we don't need this. And so you have job loss. But again, if we're really looking at national security, we have to focus on that aspect, that is not the job of the military. They are not an employment factory.
Sure. Chris, we just have about 3 minutes left here, or a little less. I do want to talk about criminal justice reform. Again, you're not running for mayor of Albuquerque or the Bernalillo County Commission, but there is an agreement right now with the Department of Justice and APD over policing practices. Do you think that the Department of Justice should allow the city to exit that agreement?
There was a study that came out not too long ago, I believe done by Harvard, that showed that when the DOJ comes into these cities and gets into these agreements with the police departments, you see an increase in crime. So I don't see that these have actually benefited any of the police departments that have entered into those agreements with the DOJ. But as far as what we should do at the federal level, obviously I'm an advocate of the decriminalization of drugs, the possession and use of it. New Mexico recently legalized marijuana, but at the same time, this is the area I like to highlight, the difference between legalization and decriminalization. Let's say you're driving in your car and you've got 2 pounds of tobacco in your vehicle. Police pulls you over for speeding. What are they going to do with the tobacco? Well, nothing. They're going to let you go because there's nothing criminal about carrying tobacco. But what if you have 4 ounces of marijuana on you now? Well, now you're a criminal because you're over that 2-ounce limit. And so people have to understand that as long as there is an incentive for the police to put you in jail or the government to put you in jail for something where there is no harm done, I'm going to be opposed to that. And I think when people look at, I point to Portugal and their decriminalization of use of all drugs in 1999 and the success that they had in reducing crime and reducing drug overdoses. When people understand that it isn't that scary and then it's actually successful, it's a lot easier to sell. We're there on marijuana. The hard sell is all the other drugs and realizing how much better this nation would be if we did decriminalized it.
I just want to take one more minute and talk about guns, if you can. I know this is not enough time to devote to the topic. Does America have a gun problem?
No, guns are the easy scapegoat because they're the tool that we use. And I like to remind people that, it doesn't matter who has a gun. If I have a gun, nobody gets harmed, right? I'm not going to go out and create a crime with a gun because of who I am as an individual. We have to recognize that really it's a societal problem. And it's real easy to try and say, oh, well, we need to just ban guns and everything will be good. But you do nothing to address the societal issues that cause the crime. And until we do that and we recognize that it's the person who's holding the gun that we have to change, not the law on gun possession, when you have that argument and people make that realization, I think then we can actually move forward and improving our the gun crime in America.
Chris Manning, we thank you so much for taking part of your day to chat with us. We really appreciate it.
All right, Matt. Thanks so much.
New Mexicans collecting unemployment benefits are once again required to prove they're actively looking for work. The Department of Workforce Solutions did away with the requirement during the pandemic, as you might recall, because it didn't make sense for people to be out looking for jobs that didn't exist. But now that more businesses are able to be open and expand, theoretically, job seekers have more opportunities. The requirement is 2 work search efforts per week in order to stay eligible for those benefits. And Laura, we knew those requirements would come back at some point. The question is, do you think right now is the right time?
I think that it is absolutely the right time to do this right now. I think that we have a serious problem across the state with places that are not able to provide services. They're open. There's counties that are now in turquoise, but the businesses are still struggling because they can't find workers. And that's a real problem for our economy. It's funny. I just told Dan, I've been spending a fair amount of time going down to the southeast part of the state, going to Roswell. And I happened to go down there at a time when they were in the turquoise. The rest of us were still in yellow and they were in turquoise. And I went to a restaurant and they had like a 2-hour wait. And they were having indoor dining. And I said, well, why are you guys at 2 hours? They said, well, we're only at 25% capacity. I said, no, you guys are in turquoise. How can you only be at 25% capacity? And they explained it was because they didn't have enough employees to be able to serve people. They didn't have enough servers and they couldn't hire enough people. And that's not just in Roswell that's happening. That's happening all over the state. That's happening here in Albuquerque. It's a serious, serious problem. So to the extent that we have people that are on unemployment right now, and if they're actually out there looking, they're more likely to find a job. There's so many opportunities right now. People are desperate to get good workers in there. So I think it makes sense for people to have to demonstrate that they're actually looking.
Daniel, it doesn't seem overly burdensome. I mean, this is the usual route, if I have this correct, for any unemployment. You have to be searching a couple times a week. But does that solve the problem of getting employers to get help? What Laura was getting at, basically.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this highlights a much bigger systemic problem in New Mexico, right? I mean, that we have people who can get a $400 a month kicker for the federal government unemployment, and it makes more sense to be unemployed than it does to go to work. And I think that's a systemic problem. It's interesting because we're going to make businesses pay more per hour and do all this other stuff to get a quote unquote living wage, but yet we're giving folks this, well, by any standard, a non-living wage, and they'd rather have that than go back to work. And so it's a problem. I mean, it's an interesting scenario. I was watching a show the other day, and they're saying it's a conundrum because we have this high level of unemployment, yet we have this huge gap of individuals ready to work. And so, it's something it's a balance that you haven't seen, right? Normally, we got a big demand in workers. We don't have enough workers, or we have too many workers and not enough jobs. Right now, not only in New Mexico, across the country, there's more jobs, but there's people that just don't want to take them. And so, I think it's a wake up call, to see what we can do. And at the same time, we're passing legislation that puts these small businesses in a bigger pickle to try to figure out how to hire people and get people to come to work. And it's just a disaster of epic proportion.
Martha, interesting. I'm thinking back to a time in my life when I would be managing small businesses for somebody else, not owning, but managing. And there was this beautiful game of people coming in to look for work. They would basically walk in and say, are you guys hiring? And you would get to the O and no, and it would they were already out the door. They were gone, basically, because they were just fulfilling that requirement. And so my question is this a bit of an additional burden for some businesses, that you can have all these folks walking in for these requirements but not serious about taking the job because, as Dan and Laura are saying, the money is just too irresistible for them right now?
Well, why is the money too irresistible, Gene? Because darn minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. I have to speak for the majority here. And the majority that are out of work right now are service workers, and the majority of those are female. It's all part and parcel of a lack of social supports. And yes, I'm using the S word, social. Okay, you're a single mother maybe, or maybe you're a married mother, but you're making less money than the husband in the household. If you're married, if you're not, you're making pittance of money. You got no child care. Half the schools are not open. We just don't have the social infrastructure to allow people to go to work for the minimum wage. There's no reason why they should. And by the way, I did the math once again. And if the minimum wage had kept up with inflation since the last minimum was passed in 1980s, you know what it would be today? $44 an hour. And so let's not blame the so-called lazy worker. Let's just not shoot for the hip on this, because there are many other factors that come into this. And I just want to say one more thing about, the implication is they'd rather be on welfare than be working. Let me tell you who's on welfare. The corporations, because the minimum wage is a corporate subsidy. The two highest minimum wage employers in this state and around the country are Walmart and McDonald's. And they are also the two highest companies with workers on Medicaid and food stamps. So if you want to talk about welfare, let's talk about corporate welfare too.
Fair enough. Had to get that in there, no doubt about that. Laura, interestingly, the benefits than some of these low-paying jobs, a study by J.P. Morgan Chase Institute found little evidence that that's actually true, that folks are making these kind of decisions. But anecdotally on the street, it's hard to get around that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I do think there's something to be said for the anecdotal issue. I mean, unfortunately, it becomes a bit of an echo chamber. I do want to clarify, though, that I never said that people on welfare were, I never used the term welfare, right? I was talking about.
Didn't, but
I mean, I just want to make clear. I mean,
it's the
I think, right, but I do think that there are a lot of small businesses in New Mexico that are struggling right now. A lot of restaurants that are struggling to find people, and folks, for whatever reason, and it could be a childcare issue. There's a lot of systemic problems that we have here in New Mexico.
And these are all individual decisions, aren't they? A lot of folks are getting lumped like there's some kind of group thought here. These are individual choices.
I mean, there's sometimes it's a county by county issue, right? There's certain jobs in different places, but I think that, I certainly see an overwhelming amount of for hire signs these days. And it's really surprising because since I've lived in New Mexico, I've never seen this many open positions and people just desperate to find somebody. So I think having a requirement like this makes sense. I mean, I remember going back for as long as you mentioned, Gene, managing businesses, but I remember being a kid and my mom had been on unemployment when she was on seasonal work down at the chili plant in Deming. She had to go and do the unemployment thing and look for a job. And to look for a job, and she was a single mom,
Yep.
had childcare issues and all that stuff. And it was very challenging to try to find a job. You did have to go out and pound the pavement and try to find a job of some sort. And that was back when there weren't a lot of opportunities. So I think, we are painting with a very broad brush, but I think the state has to do what it can at this point. And I also think that Martha has a point. I mean, we have to figure out how to increase the minimum wage. It's important, though, to note that New Mexico already has a higher minimum wage than the feds. And we were at $9, and then it increased to $10.50 starting in 2021. But we also, that then affects small businesses as well. And the federal government also needs to catch up to that.
That's
so,
right.
We're all just waiting for Congress to act to make it more of a livable wage, because I do think that there are systemic problems with not just our state, but the federal system in general.
And this is what you're all describing as part of the tremors of this aftershock of what we just went through with the pandemic. Martha, you have one more point there?
One more point.
Super
on the
quick,
minimum.
if you could.
It was in the last bailout bill that Biden proposed. The Republicans kicked it out before it could pass. So we know who's against minimum wage right now.
Here it is. We're all out of time on that topic for this week at least. Next up for our line panelists, evictions and housing shortages across our state.
Women are evicted at almost twice the rate of men.
Wow.
It was disproportionately on women of color, and that's very important for New Mexico because they compared Latinx women with Latinx men, and the same thing holds. Women, again, sometimes they have the kids to take care of and so forth, but all goes back to that minimum wage. Maybe they can't make enough to pay the rent.
I'm Laura Pascus. 2 years ago, the Our Land crew came out here to Cochiti Lake and to Abiquiu Lake to learn about blue-green algae. Well, we're back again this year because we know as temperatures keep rising and lake levels keep dropping, that blue-green algae is going to be a problem again this year. And these blooms will look a lot like they did in 2019 when we learned why they're happening and what sorts of problems they can cause. On August 13th, as the high temperature in Albuquerque climbed above normal to 94 degrees, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers closed Abiquiu Lake to swimming and other recreational activities. 9 days later, it closed Cochiti Lake.
Cyanobacteria, or we know them as blue-green algae. Technically, they're not algae. They're actually bacteria that can photosynthesize, so they can harvest light from the sun like plants and trees and grasses and shrubs. They live in the water. Generally, they're microscopic, so you can have 50 of them on the head of a pin. And they're naturally in lakes and rivers and streams and ponds as part of the green part of the food web. So check it out. All of this is this cyanobacteria that's blooming.
Becky Bixby is a professor at the University of New Mexico's biology department. She's also associate director of the Water Resources Program, and she studies algae for a living. Low water levels, high temperatures, and long sunny days, of which New Mexico has had plenty of this year, all help trigger these blooms. Runoff from farm fields and ranch lands and upstream pollution are factors, too. A combination of these can cause certain species of cyanobacteria to grow and quickly multiply. Their cells form these blooms in slow-moving waters like lakes and ponds, and then the blooms can create toxins. John Mueller is the operations project manager at Abiquiu Lake, which is on the Chama River.
Most algae are not harmful, but what we're seeing up here and what we have tested with higher toxicity levels is a lime green, kind of like pea soup color. If you see that type of formation or film on the water, avoid it, avoid contact with it, don't let your pets swim in it, keep your kids out of it, and come tell park rangers so we can kind of get a understanding of if this is a new area and if what we need to key into. But the biggest thing is just if you see that, stay out of the water.
Touching the algae can leave rashes or blisters on your skin. Swallowing it can cause stomach problems. Breathing droplets, like when water skiing or swimming, can also lead to hay fever-like symptoms. And the toxins can even cause liver or neurological problems. And for dogs who gulp lots of water when they swim or lick the algae off their coats, exposure can be fatal. Not only that, when the blooms die off and decay, they use up the oxygen in the water, sometimes triggering fish kills. Mueller and state health officials say they haven't heard reports from people who've gotten sick. And Mueller says they're monitoring the water in the lake and below the dam, where there aren't any signs of the algae.
We do not want to negatively affect people coming up and recreating and enjoying the resource. So we're trying to strike the balance of a good response plan, outreach program to educate the public, but also, if necessary, partial closures. We don't want to do a full closure because that does have an impact. But our main goal and focus is to keep our visitors as healthy as possible.
Above Abiquiu Lake, water in the Chama River is nutrient-rich with high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus. Because the river moves relatively fast, the blooms aren't a problem there, but that water ends up in the lake. Christopher Barrios is with the New Mexico Environment Department, which regulates pollution and these high nutrient levels.
It can come from point sources like wastewater treatment plants. Also a large portion comes from runoff from storm events, agriculture runoff from grazed land and irrigation water.
It's not realistic to kill off the bacteria in lakes and reservoirs, especially not across such big areas, and the treatments themselves could kill fish and harm the ecosystem. Instead, the goal is to reduce the nutrients getting into the river. That includes working with the ag and livestock communities to stop so much nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers and waste from getting into streams and rivers in the first place. These blooms are a problem in the Midwest, in the South, even sometimes in southern New Mexico, but what we're seeing at Cochiti and Abiquiu this year is new. As the climate warms and lakes and reservoirs keep dropping, we're going to see more of these blooms in New Mexico. That means facing the challenges isn't just about closing lakes here and there or getting through this summer. The blooms are pointing us toward bigger issues in our state when it comes to water supplies, rising temperatures, and water management.
In some ways, it's interesting because it brings a lot of people with different interests together, a lot of stakeholders together. People who are managing the reservoirs, people who are managing drinking water, people who are interested in the health. And so pulling these people together to solve this problem is really exciting. In a state with a lot of reservoirs, and we're dependent on those reservoirs for various things.
Even up in northern New Mexico, with its relatively cool summers, this won't be the last time New Mexicans see these blooms in lakes. So Bixby says it's important to continue monitoring the water and collecting data on the blooms and why they're happening. She also says it's important that all the agencies and stakeholders stay at the table to think about a statewide plan so we know how to respond to blooms, and especially stop them before they happen. For New Mexico in Focus and Our Land, I'm Laura Paskus.
If you find yourself in the market for a place to live, this is a frustrating time for you, no doubt. Whether buying or renting, housing prices continue to rise. It might be about to get worse for thousands of New Mexicans. Both the state and federal governments have had moratoriums on evictions during the pandemic, but those may soon be expiring. And Martha, is there a way to avoid a wave of evictions that might be cresting and just ready to break as we emerge from the pandemic's economic trough?
Well, Gene, I don't think the wave is going to crest immediately because there are some legal protections for some of the tenants. The federal moratorium does not expire till the end of June.
Right.
We don't, as far as I know, expiration date for state moratoriums, and some of them are different than the federal. But the eviction problem is here. The real estate problem, as we all have been reading about, is also here. And once again, to just be a broken record, this is falling on women more than men. A recent study came out of the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington. I just read it yesterday, that women are evicted at almost twice the rate of men.
Wow.
It was disproportionately on women of color, and that's very important for New Mexico because they compared Latinx women with Latinx men, and the same thing holds. Women, again, sometimes they have the kids to take care of and so forth. All goes back to that minimum wage. Maybe they can't make enough to pay the rent. So it is going to be a huge problem. I wish I could sit here and say, boy, here's the solution, but we don't have one right now countrywide.
Mm-hmm. You know, the numbers are scary, Laura. 50 to 100,000 people on the brink of eviction statewide we're seeing here from folks who are tracking these things. New Mexico Center for Law and Poverty, that's their recent data. I mean, you're talking a lot of these folks need to get on board with some kind of plan to stay now because there's just not a lot of backstopping. Do we have enough backstopping? Maybe it's the better question to help these folks who are in need for some rental help or assistance.
Well, it's very hard to unpack that. I think what's interesting is we have in general just a lack of affordable housing in the state, even when not in the middle of a pandemic. And if you're familiar at all with some of the housing and urban development programs, there are several housing authorities in the state of New Mexico that deal with Section 8 housing vouchers, as well as providing public housing, largely to people who meet certain criteria in terms of economic level, or they're disabled, or on some other public assistance. And so that's a very vulnerable population that actually, to some extent, I wouldn't say that the problem's addressed because we obviously have a homelessness issue, but a lot of those folks are thankfully already covered under the housing authority issues. So this is largely, this eviction issue is really affecting the working poor. So folks who are not eligible maybe for a lot of the public assistance out there, maybe are not disabled in certain categories where there would be other federal public assistance and state assistance. But it's folks who have been either unemployed or underemployed, and they're being impacted in particular by this pandemic. So we're talking about a lot of families. I do agree with Martha that it probably disproportionately affects people of color and women. Mm-hmm. If you just look at our society, we have a lot of women that are single mothers. And so we definitely are talking about the most vulnerable population. There are some programs that the federal government has started to establish that the state is working on trying to move forward and move out to people in need. And that, for example, folks can go to the New Mexico Finance Authority website, and there's some rental assistance applications there. Mm-hmm. There's also some that I think some of the local TV stations had links to as well, like KRQE. But basically, there are some programs that are already available for rental assistance, but it's trying to get folks who are in that vulnerable population connected with those resources. And that's not always an easy thing. You might have some people who just aren't even on, have internet access, aren't able to access some of that information. And so that's where a lot of these nonprofit organizations that focus on low income advocacy, they can be super important when it comes to this. Social workers, others. I mean, this is really a community problem that we need to address.
RentHelpNM.org. I'm glad you brought that up, Laura. Hey, Dan, let me talk about landlords here for a second. And they have needs, they have rights, and how do we take this into account? The perception, of course, is that they're the ones with all the dough, but it can't be on them to provide free housing forever. I hate to be, so harsh about this. And then you've got other things that cost them money as well. How do we balance this so it comes out fairly for both the landlord and the tenant who might be struggling with money right now?
So I think there's a couple things that we have to look at, and I'm sure people are going to come off the ropes on me, but I think that there's a couple things. One of them is, there was help provided to landlords during the COVID situation, right? They were given money. Mm-hmm. There was extra money given to tenants through unemployment benefits. It becomes a matter of priorities in some extent, right? I mean, you got to make sure you're paying your mortgage or your rent. You got to make sure you're getting food on the table, gas and electric, and that kind of stuff. And so I have a hard time for both sides. I have a hard time for sympathy with both sides. Landlords were given some abatement, they were given more. If they showed that they gave abatement to their tenants, mm-hmm. then there was additional monies that were available to them. But you're right. The key is at some point, either we're all going to keep paying this or everybody's going to have to figure out a way to make this work out. And I think that to some extent, the government looked at both sides of this and said, look, we're going to give extra benefits to folks that need them. We're going to give extra benefits to the landlords, and hopefully between the two, things will work out. But, as we know, it doesn't seem to work out that way. Somebody always feels that they're being wronged. they're being slighted. And at some point, it's going to be a serious, a significant problem. The one thing that's I think is going to unfairly, or not unfairly, I just think it's the way it's going to be. It's going to affect the folks that get evicted. Is the housing market right now, an apartment market, is out of control in New Mexico. It's out of control, and I mean we're literally bordering on a New York style.
Yep.
Where people are getting booted because they agreed to $900 a month, and now you can get $2,800 a month to rent that apartment. And so, if people haven't been using these resources wisely to keep themselves up, landlords are not going to miss the opportunity to boot people and try to find folks that are willing to pay more in rent.
That'll have to be the last word. Have to do it for now. Sorry about that. Thanks to all our panelists for your thoughts. However, it's always good to work through these issues with you all. I'm back in a moment with a few final thoughts. You've probably noticed how much more litter is blowing around the freeways right now. News stories, social media rants, it's undeniable. You just open your eyes. Which is why seeing the 1990s Toss No Moss public service campaign now making a comeback, it makes sense. But a better question might be why? Why do we need a constant reminder to not trash our amazing community? There's a telling scene about our approach to littering in the old AMC television series Mad Men, when the Draper family finishes a city park picnic by standing up, shaking all the trash off the blanket, woof, in one full swoop, and then just leaving. That was common in the 60s, the setting for that show, partly because there was a city worker not far behind to pick it all up. Remember that Don't Be a Litterbug TV campaign back then in response? Because every litter bit hurts, that was the tagline. Well, it's kind of the same now when you consider we haven't used prisoners on freeway cleanup details since early last year, and look where we are. Back to social media, how many videos have you seen of truck beds and trailers on the freeway? No tarps, nothing to tie anything down, stuff blowing out of these things. It's a huge contributor. Having a beautiful community shouldn't come down to slogans and prisoners at the side of the road. Keep it in the vehicle, please. Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and the Nieper Natural History Programming Fund for KNME-TV. And viewers like you.